Hello and welcome to Procrastination Points video Snark. I'm making my way through Fallen by Lauren Kate. If you haven't seen the other videos, you might want to do that before jumping into this one, or else you might be confused. Links will be posted below. Chapter 8. Pen comes to visit Luce on Saturday morning, and is apparently that level of stupid where she doesn't know how doors work. She comments on Luce's room, and this prompts Luce to look at the window which overlooks the cemetery. The avenging angel that had mysteriously disappeared after the accident mysteriously disappeared? Really? Does she honestly think that the school would just leave a broken statue lying around? I know that there's no groundskeeper anymore, but come on. It's apparently everybody's day to be stupid. Pen starts to rifle through Luce's things to the point where Luce starts to get insanely annoyed. Pen had come over to study but failed to bring any study materials. She teases Luce about wanting to study Daniel, but Luce is quick to shush her. Luce knows how fast that word gets around at the school and doesn't want for this to get back to Daniel. Once Luce has reassured herself that nobody's obviously listening in on her conversation, she asks how it is that Pen knows about her crush on Daniel. Pen says that it's obvious, stating that Luce is constantly mooning over him and wasted 20 minutes in the computer lab endlessly retyping Daniel's name into the search bar. Girl, get a grip. Pen offers to show Luce Daniel's file, but Luce says that doing that would be entering creepy stalker territory. I would also like to take a moment and state that Ariane has barely made a few passing mentions since Pen showed up. So much for that, I guess. As Pen and Luce walk across the field common area, Luce is surprised to see the other students wearing something other than black. There are a couple of teachers who are keeping an eye on the kids outside, and they are described as smoking as well. And, ugh, I just can't get over how everybody in this series is smoking. Maybe if this series was set in the 1950s or something, but not in the era of cell phones and internet. When they get into the office area, Luce suddenly remembers that she's not supposed to be doing this. She thinks about what sort of punishment that Randy might dish out and asks Pen about the Reds. Pen casually says that she put dead batteries in some of them, like it's not that big of a deal to mess around with the school security system like that. They go down into the basement, which is also another relic of the Civil War, and smells strongly of mildew. Luce begins to feel anxious when Pen turns the light on, since it's also a little dark down there, a perfect place for shadows to be. Pen makes an offhanded comment about how the files have been moved since she was last down there, which was about a week earlier. Pen finds a file and remarks that it's insanely thin. There's a copy of an old student ID in the file, taken 3 years earlier. Luce feels like this must be from where she knows Daniel. Pen reads the file, stating that Daniel is an orphan who is under the care of the Los Angeles County Orphanage, which he's a long way from home if that's the case. How did he end up in a reform school on literally the other side of the country? She continues on, stating his crimes, which are insanely petty, jaywalking and loitering, and all of that was somehow enough to get him sent to a school for naughty children 2,500 miles away from where he had been. Even Luce feels like the things in Daniel's file can't possibly be right, or that there's stuff missing. And then they hear somebody walking directly overhead. Just as Pen tells Luce that nobody ever comes down there, somebody comes down there. Pen and Luce hide in the shadows. It's a librarian who has some boxes of stuff. She mentions that she's got more to bring down under her breath before she leaves again. Pen tells Luce to run up the stairs and to say that she got lost looking for the bathroom if anybody questions why she's there. She assures Luce that she'll be okay, that she has permission to be down there. Luce feels like there's more to Daniel's file, but Pen says that she'll look for it on her own. Luce also has to remind the readers that she still can't choose between Daniel and Cam. Ugh. Luce does as Pen told her to do and goes up the stairs. However, waiting up there is Molly. Let me guess. You're still planning on ignoring my suggestion to stay away from Daniel. Literally nobody said anything about Daniel. Molly also knows about Trevor, even though Luce literally never told anybody what his name was. Luce suddenly feels weird about Pen and feels like maybe Pen had told Molly. Molly makes another weird threat for Luce to stay away from Daniel before she leaves. Luce thinks about confronting Molly, but knows that she doesn't have the courage to take the other girl on right now. Instead, Luce watches as Molly joins Gabby outside, where the two of them talk and look over to where Luce is still standing. Luce can only just imagine Molly spilling Luce's secrets, and soon the entire school will know. As Luce is stupidly standing there thinking about things, Roland cries out that there's a ball headed right towards her. The soccer ball rebounds off from Luce's head and sails straight back to Roland. Daniel comes over to make sure that she's okay and teases that most people don't use their heads to return a ball. As he's sort of fussing over her, Luce is aware that Gabby and Molly are watching them. She makes a comment about Daniel's girlfriend, but he says that he doesn't have one and is curious as to who Luce thinks he's dating. He goes on to say that she must have taken quite the hit to her head and wants to walk around with her some to make sure that she's alright. But taking her to the school nurse is too much, or let me guess, the school doesn't have one. He says that he wants to take Luce somewhere where they won't be watched, so he takes her out behind the gym where they walk out into the forest. And I seem to recall that the book described that there were walls with barbed wire in them, but yet they just let the students waltz out through the woods like it's not that big of a deal. What exactly is the wall with barbed wire for? Aesthetic? He takes her to the lake where there's something in the middle of it. When Luce asks about what that something is, Daniel starts to undress and says that he'll let her win the swim over to it. Luce watches him swim for a moment and then dives into the water after him. They swim out to the big rock in the middle of the lake where they climb up on top of it. As Luce looks at Daniel, she again states that she feels like she knows him. He seems to think that this is some weird kind of come on, but Luce insists that it's not. He tells her that he should have been upfront with her in the gym. He goes on to say that he was hurt bad by a girl not too long ago, and he's not looking for romance or a relationship. And just as I'm thinking, then why did you drag Luce away from the school? Luce also echoes my thoughts. However, when Luce questions him about the story he just told her, he's like, I don't know you, and jumps off of the rock to swim back to shore. However, Luce feels like there's something strange in how quickly he managed to reach the shore. And then as Luce watches him get out from the water, she feels like there's this bright glow around him. Luce thinks that she really did hurt herself more than she was willing to admit. However, Daniel was described with a weird glow in the cemetery just before the statue fell over, so this is probably important. Chapter 9. Monday evening, Luce sits in a class presented by the librarian. Luce feels like she has to make up for the classes she missed before she'd even come to the school. However, she's the only one who's even pretending like she's paying attention. The teacher is making, I kid you not, shadow puppets. However, it's evening and the shadows are starting to come out to play, and I'm not talking about the teacher. This makes Luce think of how long that she's been in this classroom since she started off her morning in there. She also thinks about how weird it is that the teacher is honestly kind of acting like the other students are insanely little kids instead of teenagers. But this makes Luce feel bad since the teacher had taken Luce aside and told her gently how far behind she was in her stupid family tree paper. The teacher then starts to reference Paradise Lost, which, ugh. Longtime fans of me will know that I cannot stand it whenever the story starts to use a famous work of classical literature as a tie-in for the main character's whiny teenage problems, mainly because few authors actually manage to understand the point. At this point, at least, it's not another stinking Romeo and Juliet or Pride and Prejudice. Luce is angry at the students who are heckling the teacher, mainly because she's been sitting in this room for longer than she should be, and also because she had to miss dinner in order to attend this non-option lecture. Sure, they'd been fed, but it was only just dried cheese and bologna sandwiches. Luce is a vegetarian, if you'll remember. She says that she has a difficult enough time finding things to eat. However, I don't get what the big fuss is over picking the cold cuts from her sandwich. Cam offers her some figs, but before Luce can accept them, Gabby rudely grabs them from Cam's hands and throws them into the trash. She insists that Luce shouldn't eat them simply because Cam might have drugged them. She instead offers Luce some peanut M&Ms. Meanwhile, back to the present. The teacher has moved past Paradise Lost and is just talking about religious stuff. I take it back. Please give us a Pride and Prejudice reference. I don't want to deal with Bible stuff. I don't have the emotional energy. Molly sends a note onto Luce's desk and asks her if Luce is short for Lucifer since Satan was brought up in the lecture. Ha ha ha. Very funny. I bet that it took you minutes and minutes to come up with that. Luce is about to send a note back saying that she'd been named after a singer who'd been playing when her parents first met, but the teacher up front makes a bizarre movement and it stills Luce. The teacher says something about Lucifer's fall from heaven and Luce looks over to Daniel. Their eyes meet ever so briefly before he looks away again. Luce randomly remembers a dream she had starring Daniel. On that rock in the middle of the lake, after Daniel left, Luce jumped in after him. Luce quickly became surrounded by so many fish that she couldn't see, and she started to sink. And then Daniel had appeared, taken Luce in his arms, and they'd gone back up to the surface. But that was all just a dream. Obviously. It's also probably dripping with foreshadowing, too. As Luz comes back to herself, she decides not to send the note back to Molly. Ariane then sends Luz a note of her own asking where she and Daniel went off to the other day. You know, considering Daniel doesn't want anything to do with Luz, he sure did feed into the gossip mills by wandering off with her. Ariane then tries to send another paper airplane to Luz, but Molly makes a grab for it. The two girls wrestle with the note for a second before the teacher realizes what's going on. She asks what's so important that they have to interrupt her lecture for. Luz throws Molly under the bus by saying that Molly disagrees with the teacher's opinions about hell. Molly stands up and says that hell should be reserved for chicken cowards, all while staring pointedly at Luz. Ugh. However, Luz is unable to focus on anything Molly says because the shadows start coming for her. As Luz sits down, she realizes that they're going for Ariane's second note, which Luz had hastily stuffed into her pocket before the teacher noticed them. Luz starts to think really hard how she wants the shadows to go away, and then to her surprise, but not mine, they do. The teacher then calls it a day, saying that her hands are tired from so much shadow puppetry. Luz then gets a chance to read the note. Ariane makes a reference of Daniel having said that he was hurt by another girl before, which means that she's probably not the first one that he's used that line on. And I mean, I get it. It keeps people away from you, but he doesn't have to be so weird about it. As everybody is packing up to leave, Daniel comes over to Luz and asks her how she found the lecture. When she says that she didn't like the lecture, he says that he did, but that he also didn't. He goes on to say that his family wasn't very religious, so it's hard for him to connect with the material. Luz is surprised that he would mention his family, especially after having read that Daniel grew up in the foster care system in California. But the things she say almost seem to tip Daniel off that something isn't right here. Mercifully, Roland calls Daniel away and Luz kicks herself over what she said. And I know that I keep saying this, but it's like the actual plot wants to break out from all of this nonsense and actually, tell its story. But it's like something is holding the author back that she felt like she needed to stall for an unholy amount of time before she actually got to the point. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and be here next Monday. Don't forget to check out my other video Snark series. If you're new here, then I also run a Tumblr where I post daily book snarks. I also have a Patreon where I post early releases of my daily snarks, but also bonus snark that isn't up anywhere else. Plus, all supporters get a big shout out. Thank you so much to Dawn and Phoebe for supporting me already. You can hear your name next week by joining my Patreon for $1 a month. However, since it is a recurring charge, I also accept PayPal and Ko-fi. Also, if you want to read some of the stuff that I published, then you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have 17 erotic short stories, 1 short story collection, and 1 full-length novel. Links for all of these things will be posted below. See you next week, guys.